Lonely ranchers saved Apache women from a lion, then 50 warriors surrounded his ranch. At dawn, James Callahan woke to the sound of silence, unnatural silence. His ranch was surrounded, not by coyotes, not by Comanche, but by soldiers in blue coats, rifles gleaming in the pale light. 50 yards out, they stood like a ring of steel, every barrel pointed at the cabin he had built with his own 2 hands. And inside that cabin, in the narrow bed where he himself had slept just yesterday, lay an Apache girl with wounds that still bled through her bandages. He had carried her home the night before, dragging her from the jaws of a mountain lion that had stalked her through the canyon. He could still feel the beast's hot breath, still hear the rasp of its growl when he'd swung a burning branch to drive it back. Saving her had been instinct, not choice. Now, as the sun lifted over the desert, James realized that last night's courage might cost him everything. The girl's people called her Ayoka. To the soldiers outside, she was nothing but an enemy fugitive. To James Callahan, she was a life entrusted into his hands, and the reason death now waited at his door. He rose from his chair slowly, every joint stiff with the weight of what was to come. Through the cracks in the wooden shutters, he studied the men outside. They did not shout, nor demand, nor move closer. They simply stood in formation, patient as vultures, their breath fogging faintly in the chill of dawn. James had seen such stillness before, on the eve of battlefields back east, when both sides waited for the first musket to fire. His hand brushed the rifle propped against the wall, the same weapon that had kept wolves and rustlers at bay through years of solitude. But this morning his weapon felt useless. A single man, no matter how steady his aim, could not stand against a company of trained soldiers. A whisper stirred inside him, not from fear, but from faith, the same faith that had carried him through the blood and smoke of the Civil War. You are my hiding place. You will protect me from trouble and surround me with songs of deliverance. Psalm 32:7. The words came unbidden, a prayer remembered from his mother's Bible, long packed away in a trunk. Yet in that moment, with danger pressing in from all sides, the verse steadied him more than steel or gunpowder ever could. Behind him, the girl stirred. Ayoka's eyes, dark as midnight, blinked open. Pain flickered across her face as she tried to sit up. James crossed the room, kneeling beside her. "They've come," he said quietly. Her lips parted, and though her voice was weak, the weight of her words pressed heavy on his chest. "If they find me here, they will burn your home. They will kill you." James shook his head, more to himself than to her. "Yesterday I pulled you from a lion's jaws. Today it's soldiers. Doesn't matter. You're still under my roof, and I don't hand people over to die." Outside, a trumpet call split the silence, sharp and commanding. The soldiers shifted their formation, rifles lifting higher, sunlight flashing on steel. James tightened his grip on the rifle stock. The day had only begun, but already he knew. By sundown, nothing in his life would ever be the same. The trumpet's echo faded into the wide desert air, leaving the ranch wrapped again in silence. James felt the weight of every eye upon him. Men who had orders, men who would not hesitate if provoked. He had fought alongside soldiers once, marched with them across muddy battlefields where flags dipped in blood and smoke. But the men outside were no longer his brothers in arms. To them, he was just a stubborn rancher standing in the way of their duty. A commanding voice rang out. "Callahan, we know you're in there. You're harboring an Apache fugitive. Hand her over and we'll be on our way. Resist and you'll answer for it." James stood still, his palm pressed against the rough wood of the door. The words were measured, almost courteous, but carried the bite of a drawn blade. He glanced back at Ayoka, who leaned heavily against the wall, her face pale beneath streaks of soot and dried blood. Her dark eyes pleaded with him, though she said nothing. "I didn't ask you to risk this," she whispered finally, her voice trembling. "No," James answered, "you didn't." His jaw tightened. "But yesterday I made a choice when I pulled you out of that canyon. Maybe I should have walked on, let the lion finish its work. But I didn't, and now I reckon that choice belongs to me, not them." Through the shutters, he saw the soldiers shifting, waiting for his reply. He could almost hear the click of rifle hammers being drawn back. He remembered another verse then, one that his mother used to speak whenever storms rolled over the plains. "There is no fear in love, but perfect love drives out fear." 1 John 4:18. James swallowed hard. It wasn't love, not yet, not the kind a man spoke out loud. But there was something in the way Ayoka looked at him, something in the way she had clutched his hand when the lion circled them in the canyon, that made him realize fear had no place here. He turned back to her. "What do they want with you?" Her eyes dropped to the floor. "They call me enemy because I am Apache, but my people—" She hesitated, fighting to catch her breath. "My people wait for me. I carry medicine for our children. Without it, many will die when winter comes." James felt the words like a stone in his chest. This wasn't about one girl. This was about a people clinging to survival, caught between hunger, sickness, and the iron fist of the army. Outside, the commander's voice cut through again, sharper this time. "Last warning, Callahan, open your door." James ran a hand over his unshaven face, then looked once more at Ayoka. "You're safe here," he said firmly, though the crack in his voice betrayed the fear gnawing inside him. The butt of a rifle slammed against his door. The boards shook. Horses stamped nervously outside. James lifted his rifle at last, not to fire, but to hold it steady across his chest like a man clinging to principle. If this was the day his ranch became a battlefield, then so be it. Because yesterday he had fought off a lion for a stranger, and today he knew he would fight again for her. If you found this helpful, a quick like really helps us keep creating. If you're still watching right now, drop a 1 in the comments. James sat in the dim cabin, the rifle across his knees, waiting for the soldiers outside to make their next move. The girl slept fitfully against the far wall, her breaths shallow, her wounds seeping through fresh bandages. For a moment, in the half-light of morning, he forgot where he was and slipped backward in time. Back to the mud, the smoke, the endless screams of the war he had tried so hard to bury. The Civil War had broken him in ways he seldom admitted aloud. He remembered the roar of cannon fire rolling across the fields of Shiloh, remembered young boys clutching at wounds no surgeon could save, remembered the stink of blood and fear that clung to his uniform for days. He had carried comrades from the battlefield only to bury them the next dawn. Some nights he still saw their faces when he closed his eyes. When the fighting ended, he had drifted west, away from the graves, away from the shattered towns, away from men who swore loyalty only to turn on one another. He had built his ranch plank by plank, nail by nail, determined to carve out a life where no one could betray him again. People called him a loner. He didn't mind. Better a loner than a fool who trusted the wrong soul. And yet, as he looked at the girl now, Ayoka, her name whispered like a secret, he felt the old walls inside him shift. He had pulled her from death's jaws, not out of duty, not even out of charity, but from something deeper he couldn't explain. Perhaps it was instinct, or perhaps it was the same quiet voice that had whispered to him in the trenches when all hope seemed gone. Hold fast, do not give in. He rose and poured a small tin cup of water, bringing it to her lips. She drank slowly, her eyes flickering open. For a moment she simply studied him, as if weighing whether to fear him or trust him. "You fought the lion," she said at last, her accent thick but her English clear enough. James gave a short nod. "Didn't leave me much choice. Beast was near twice my size." Her lips curved into the faintest smile. "And you won." He almost laughed at that, though laughter fell foreign on his tongue. No, just lived long enough to tell the story. Silence stretched between them, but it wasn't the silence of suspicion. It was gentler, more curious, like two travelers warming by the same fire. James realized it had been years since he had spoken this many words to another living soul in a single morning. Years since anyone had looked at him not as a hermit or an old soldier, but as a man who had chosen to stand between death and another's life. Outside, the soldiers shifted again, their boots crunching in the dirt. The world beyond his walls still promised danger, still demanded choices he wasn't ready to make. But inside the cabin, for the first time in years, James felt the presence of another soul filling the silence. And he knew, with an uneasy certainty, that his solitude was over. By mid-morning the sun was high, and the patience of the soldiers outside had burned away like morning mist. Their commander rode forward, his horse stamping restlessly, its breath white in the chill air. His voice carried sharp and clear across the ranch yard. "Callahan," he barked, "you've had your chance. Hand over the girl, or we'll smoke you out. You've got 1 hour before we torch this place to the ground." The words struck like hammer blows against the wooden walls. James sat motionless, his face shadowed beneath the brim of his hat. He had expected threats, but hearing them spoken aloud, hearing the promise of fire against the home he had carved from wilderness, cut deep. He remembered the sweat that had soaked his shirt when he first raised these beams, the nights spent mending fence by moonlight, the endless toil that had made this patch of land his own. To see it burned would be like watching his own body turn to ash. Across the room, Ayoka's eyes widened in fear. Her voice trembled. "They will kill you for helping me. Your home, your life, it will all be gone." James didn't answer at once. His gaze lingered on the rough-hewn crossbeam above the fireplace, a place where, years ago, he had etched a single verse from memory with the point of his knife. The words whispered back to him now, steadying his breath. "There is no fear in love, but perfect love drives out fear." 1 John 4:18. He closed his eyes. "Lord, I don't know why you put her in my path. I don't know if I'm meant to protect her or if this is the end for me. But if fear is not from you, then give me courage enough to do what's right." When he opened his eyes again, Ayoka was watching him closely, as if she sensed the silent prayer. "You don't have to stay," she whispered. "If you open the door and let them take me, they will leave you alive." James leaned forward, his weathered hand brushing the edge of the beaded charm tied around her wrist. "You think I'd build a life just to save my own skin? I've seen too many men throw others to the wolves to keep themselves breathing. That's not the kind of man I aim to be." Ayoka lowered her gaze, her lashes trembling. "In my people's tongue, there is a word for that kind of man. We call him one who stands between." James felt something shift inside him. He had no wife, no children, no kin left in the world. But hearing her speak those words stirred a sense of purpose he thought he had buried long ago. Outside, the soldiers began to move. James heard the clink of flint and steel, the crackle of torches being lit. Smoke would come next. He gripped his rifle tighter, the wood slick with sweat. The choice was no longer distant. It was pounding on his door, demanding an answer. The pounding outside faded into uneasy stillness. The soldiers had not yet set the fire, but James knew it was only a matter of time. He lowered his rifle and crossed the room to where Ayoka sat, her breathing shallow, her gaze fixed on the dirt floor, as if the weight of her thoughts pressed heavier than her wounds. "You carry more than fear in your eyes," he said quietly. "What is it you're not telling me?" For a long moment she did not answer. Then, slowly, she lifted her hand. Around her wrist was a narrow band of leather strung with small turquoise beads and polished bone. It shimmered faintly in the shaft of sunlight that cut through the shutters. James frowned. "That's not just decoration, is it?" Ayoka's fingers traced the beads tenderly, almost reverently. "This was my mother's," she whispered, "and her mother's before her. Each bead was added for a child born, for a promise kept, for a life carried forward.
Her eyes glistened. "When the sickness came last winter, my mother gave it to me, said it would remind me that I carry our people's tomorrow." James felt the words strike deep. He had thought she was only a fugitive, hunted for being Apache. But now he understood. She was the vessel of her tribe's hope, carrying not only her life, but the memory and future of her people. "That's why the soldiers want you so badly," he muttered. "Not just because you're Apache, but because breaking you breaks them." She nodded slowly. "If they take me, my people's spirit dies with me. They know this." James leaned back, rubbing a hand over his jaw. He had fought wars before, but wars of men against men. He had never stood in a fight where the weapon was not just steel or powder, but the will to survive as a people. His gaze returned to the beads, gleaming like fragments of sky. "So if you die, they lose more than a daughter. They lose their story." "Yes," she whispered, "but if I live, and if I can bring medicine back to my people before the cold winds come, then maybe the story continues." The silence stretched, heavy with meaning. Outside, a horse whinnied nervously. James knew the soldiers were waiting, their torches ready. Yet in that quiet moment, his attention was fixed not on the danger pressing in, but on the fragile thread of hope tied around Ioka's wrist. He thought of the Bible verse he had spoken to himself earlier. "Perfect love drives out fear." Could it be that love was not always between a man and a woman, but sometimes love for a people, a legacy, a future? Ioka looked up at him, her voice barely more than a breath. "Why did you save me from the lion?" James searched for an answer, but none came. At last he said, "Maybe because I was tired of walking past graves. Maybe because I needed to believe one life was worth the risk." Her eyes softened, and for the first time since she had stumbled bleeding into his cabin, James felt her trust him fully. Not as a stranger, not even as a rescuer, but as someone who now shared the burden of her people's hope. Night fell like a curtain of iron. The soldiers had not yet struck, but James knew it was only a matter of time. When darkness thickened, he whispered to Ioka to rise. She winced as she stood, her wounds not yet fully healed, but determination burned in her eyes. They slipped out the back of the cabin, moving through the corral where James's mare and old gelding waited, their ears twitching nervously. James packed what little food he could carry, strapped his rifle across his back, and guided Ioka to the saddle. The desert night stretched vast around them, every shadow sharp, every sound amplified. James kept his senses taut, ears straining for the jangle of bridles or the crunch of boots in the dirt. He knew cavalry patrols would spread wide, lanterns cutting through the dark, hunting them like wolves on the scent. "Stay low," he whispered as they rode into the scrubland. "Follow the creek bed, it hides our tracks." Hours dragged by in silence, broken only by the steady rhythm of hooves on dry earth. The moon rose, silvering the land, revealing jagged rocks and twisted mesquite. James guided the horses carefully, remembering lessons from war. Move quiet, move cautious, never leave a trail a blind man could follow. At one point, a patrol passed close. James pressed Ioka flat against the ground, his arm shielding her as the glow of lanterns swept across the rocks. She held her breath, her heartbeat pounding against his arm. Only when the sound of hooves faded did he ease back, their eyes meeting in the dim light. She smiled faintly, nerves trembling at the edges. "You saved me again." James shook his head. "Just bought us a little more time." They pressed on, deeper into the wilderness. By midnight they reached a narrow canyon where water trickled faintly through stone. James let the horses drink, then built a small fire shielded by rocks. The flames licked upward, casting a soft glow over their weary faces. Ioka sat beside him, her blanket wrapped tight around her shoulders. For the first time since she had come to his cabin, her voice carried a note of peace. "When I was a child," she said softly, "my father would tell stories by the fire. He said the stars were the campfires of our ancestors, watching us, guiding us home." James looked up at the endless sky, the stars glittering like frost. "My mother used to say something similar, except she called them God's lanterns, keeping the night from swallowing us whole." For a heartbeat, their worlds, Apache and Christian, native and settler, rested side by side in the flicker of the fire. Ayoka laughed gently, a sound that startled James with its softness. It had been years since laughter touched this land, years since it touched his ears. "Why do you laugh?" he asked. "Because even though soldiers chase us, even though death walks close," she said, eyes glinting in the firelight, "we can still speak of stars." James stared at her, a warmth stirring in the hollow place where loneliness had lived too long. He realized the danger they faced was not only drawing them together in fear, but binding them in something deeper, trust, fragile yet fierce. And for the first time in many years, James Callahan allowed himself to believe he was not alone. By the second night, the canyon walls opened into a wide basin where the scrubland stretched toward distant ridges. James halted the horses, his instincts prickling. Something moved in the dark, not soldiers, but lighter steps, quicker, shadows flitting among rocks. A sharp whistle cut the air. James dropped his hand to his rifle, but before he could draw, figures emerged from the brush. 5 young Apache warriors, lean and wiry, bows strung, arrows already notched. Their faces were painted with ash and ochre, eyes glinting in the moonlight. Ayoka's breath caught. "Running Fox," she whispered, relief breaking across her face. The lead scout, barely older than 20, lowered his bow when he saw her. He strode forward, grasped her arms, and spoke quickly in Apache, his words thick with urgency. James could not understand, but he read the meaning in Ayoka's eyes. She was safe among kin. Then the boy's gaze shifted to James, and the warmth vanished. His eyes narrowed, his bow rising again. A stream of harsh words spilled from his lips, every syllable heavy with accusation. Ayoka stepped between them, speaking firmly, but Running Fox's suspicion did not ease. He jabbed the arrow toward James's chest. James raised his hand slowly, keeping his voice even. "Tell him if he wants me gone, I'll walk." "But without me, you'll have the cavalry on your heels before dawn," Ayoka translated. The young scouts exchanged sharp whispers, doubt flickering among them. James knelt, unrolling the small bundle of supplies he carried. He laid out strips of jerky, a half loaf of bread, and the last of his dried beans. Then he took his knife and drew a crude map in the dirt, showing ridges, stream beds, and a hidden trail only a seasoned tracker would know. "These paths will keep us ahead," he said, his finger pressing into the earth. "Soldiers travel heavy. They'll take the open ground. You follow me, and I'll get you through the rocks." Ayoka translated again. Running Fox frowned, crouched low, and studied the map. Slowly, his bow lowered. One of the younger scouts muttered something that sounded like doubt, but another pointed to the bread and snatched it eagerly, hunger outweighing suspicion. The small fire they lit that night was tense, silence stretching between Apache and rancher. James sat apart, sharpening his knife by habit, while the scouts murmured in their own tongue. Yet, as hours passed, something shifted. When a coyote howled close, James rose first, scanning the darkness with the steady calm of a man who had stood guard 1,000 nights. He moved like a soldier, quiet, disciplined, certain. The scouts watched him with new eyes, realizing this white rancher had more than words. He had instincts sharpened by war. Later, when Ayoka lay beneath her blanket, she whispered across the embers to James, "They will not say it, but they see you now. They know you stand between them and death." James met her gaze across the firelight. For years he had been called loner, hermit, outcast. Now, even in suspicion, he felt the stirrings of something different, respect. The fourth night found them huddled in a ravine, their fire little more than embers, their bellies aching with hunger. The scouts had eaten the last of the bread the night before, and the jerky was gone by morning. James chewed on a strip of rawhide just to keep his jaw busy, though it did nothing to quiet the emptiness inside him. Ioka sat close, her blanket drawn tight around her shoulders. Her face looked thinner, the strain of travel etching itself into the lines around her eyes. Yet there was no complaint in her voice, only resolve. She tended to the youngest scout's blistered feet, humming softly in Apache, the melody rising like a fragile thread of hope against the vast silence. James watched her, his chest tightening. He had seen men break under lesser hardships, veterans collapsing after long marches, officers unraveling under pressure. Yet this girl, wounded and hunted, carried herself with a steadiness that shamed him. Above them, the night was restless. Coyotes yelped on distant hills. Farther still, James thought he caught the faint jangle of bridles, the muffled stomp of horses. The cavalry was closing. He knew their pattern: advance by day, rest by night. If he could hear them now, they would reach the ravine by morning. Running Fox cursed under his breath when he realized how close the danger pressed. His words flew sharp and fast, hands gesturing toward James. Ioka translated with reluctance. "He says we should split, leave you behind. The soldiers chase you, not us." James almost laughed, though the sound held no humor. "That's not true. They'll hunt all of you until they have her. You think they'll spare a band of Apache youths in the hills?"
"No, they'll call it a victory," the young men muttered, torn between fear and pride. James met their eyes, steady as stone. "If you want to live through this, you stay together. Alone, you're prey. Together, we have a chance." The argument died to sullen silence. Hunger and fear gnawed at them all, but for the moment his words held. James leaned back against the rocks, exhaustion heavy in his bones. His gaze drifted to Ioka, who now sat quietly, her head bowed in prayer, or perhaps in weariness. The firelight caught the beads on her wrist, each one glowing faintly like captured stars. And something shifted in him. He had thought of her as responsibility, a burden placed in his hands by fate. But watching her now, tending the wounded, holding the group together with nothing but a song and quiet strength, he realized she was more than that. She was a light in the dark, steady and unyielding. For years, James had lived with nothing but ghosts, his heart closed off to the world. But in Ioka's presence, something fragile stirred, something that felt dangerously close to hope. Above them, the wind carried the faint echo of hooves. The soldiers were coming. But for the first time since the siege began, James no longer thought only of survival. He thought of what it might mean to live again, not just for himself, but for someone worth standing between. If you're still watching right now, drop a 1 in the comments so I know you're still with me on this journey. The canyon narrowed as the party rode deeper into the mountains. Sheer walls of red stone loomed on either side, their jagged ridges cutting against the sky like the teeth of some ancient beast. The air grew heavier, stiller, until even the horses balked at moving forward. James felt it before he saw it, the shift in the land, the way the silence pressed down as though the earth itself held its breath. "This is their ground," he murmured. Running Fox, the young scout at the lead, gave a sharp nod. He pointed to a rock face where deep claw marks gouged the surface, long rakes of fury etched into stone. The gashes were fresh. James ran his fingertips over them, the edges raw and sharp. A mountain lion had been here, and not long ago. The group moved on warily, their footsteps echoing in the canyon. Birds had vanished, and even the insects were still. Only the whisper of the wind brushed through the narrow pass, carrying with it the faint, musky scent of predator. James's mare shifted nervously, ears pinned flat, eyes rolling white. He soothed her with a hand on the reins, though his own pulse thudded hard in his throat.
He had faced lions before, once with nothing but fire and desperation, but never here, in the heart of their hunting ground, where every rock could conceal a shadow, every shadow a killer. Ayoka rode close beside him, her gaze fixed on the cliffs. She whispered in Apache, words James did not understand, but the cadence told him it was a prayer. Her hand never strayed far from the beaded charm at her wrist, the small tokens of her people glimmering faintly in the fading light. He envied her certainty. For him, faith came not as chance or ritual, but as a quiet memory, a verse murmured by his mother when storms raged. He felt it stir now, like a hand steadying his shoulders. "Do not fear, for I am with you." The scouts dismounted, moving like shadows among the rocks, bows strung tight. Their young faces were set with determination, but James saw the fear in their eyes. This was no longer about outrunning soldiers.
It was about surviving a land where they were no longer the hunters. As dusk bled into night, they camped in a hollow beneath a ledge. James built no fire. Flames would draw both soldiers and predators. The group ate sparingly from what little remained, dried roots, a scrap of venison left by the scouts. The meal tasted like ash. Every sound beyond the circle of rocks, the shift of gravel, the whisper of wind, made hands tighten on weapons. James lay awake, rifle across his chest, staring into the darkness. He knew they had passed the last line of safety. Retreat was no longer an option. Before them waited the lion's domain, and behind them rode soldiers eager to finish what the beast might begin. There was no turning back. The first glow of dawn brushed the canyon walls when the sound reached them. Distant, rhythmic, undeniable. The jangle of bridles. The metallic clatter of rifles against saddles. The soldiers were coming. James crouched low behind a ridge, watching dust rise on the horizon. A dozen riders, maybe more, their blue coats flashing as the sun crested the peaks. He felt the scouts stiffen beside him, arrows already notched.
Running Fox muttered in Apache, his eyes burning with defiance. "They will find us," Ayoka whispered. Her voice trembled, not from fear but certainty. James scanned the terrain. Ahead, the canyon narrowed into a twisted gorge, littered with boulders and thorn brush. A perfect place for ambush, but not their ambush. No, this ground belonged to something else, the true ruler of these mountains. He weighed the choices in his mind. Surrender meant giving her up to men who would drag her back in chains, or worse. Fight here, in the open, meant certain death. That left only one path, and it was lined with claws and fangs. He turned to Ayoka, his voice low and steady. "If we go forward, it won't be soldiers we face. It'll be lions, big ones." Her dark eyes met his, unwavering. Better to face the beasts of the earth than the beasts in uniform. The young scouts nodded grimly, though James saw their fear flicker. He felt it too, gnawing at his gut. He remembered the first lion he had fought, the way its roar had shaken the very air, the weight of his body slamming into him. He had barely survived then. What chance did they have now, with soldiers at their backs and predators before them? But something in him hardened. He had run from battlefields before, left the smoke and blood of war behind him, seeking peace in solitude. Yet peace had found him only in loneliness. Now, with these young lives looking to him, with Ayoka's trust burning in her gaze, he knew he could not run again. "Into the gorge," he said. His voice carried the weight of command, the same tone he once used leading men across shattered fields. "Stay close, stay quiet, and when the lions come, you follow my lead." Ayoka reached out, her hand brushing his sleeve. "You would risk this for us?" James looked past her, toward the shadowed gorge, waiting like a throat ready to swallow them whole. "No," he said softly. "I risk it because it's the only way forward. There's no turning back now." Behind them, the soldiers' shouts grew louder, echoing across the canyon. Ahead, the gorge yawned wide, its walls streaked with claw marks that gleamed in the dawn light. James gripped the Apache knife at his belt, the blade gifted by hands that believed he might yet prove himself worthy. He took a breath, steady and final. Let's walk into the lion's den. The gorge swallowed them whole. Shadows clung to the walls, and the air felt heavy, as if even the wind feared to move here. James led the way, every sense straining, eyes flicking from ridge to ridge. He had walked battlefields where death crouched unseen, and this place felt the same. Behind them, the sound of hooves grew louder. The soldiers had entered the gorge. Shouts echoed off the stone, confident at first, the harsh bark of men who believed themselves hunters. James's jaw tightened. They didn't know. Not yet. Running Fox gestured to a boulder, and the scouts climbed swiftly, melting into the rocks like shadows. Ioka stayed close at James's side, her hand brushing the beads on her wrist. He whispered to her, "Keep your eyes on me. Whatever happens, don't run." The first scream came minutes later. It tore through the gorge, raw and ragged, followed by the furious snarl of something not human. James spun, rifle raised. High on the ridge, a soldier flailed, his horse shrieking beneath him. A blur of tawny fur struck from the shadows, dragging the man down in a spray of dust and blood. The rifle clattered uselessly against stone. The lion's roar shook the canyon walls. The cavalry froze. Men who had faced Apache ambushes without flinching now went pale, their courage draining into the dust. One fired wildly into the rocks, the shot ricocheting harmlessly. Another shouted orders, his voice cracking, his mount rearing in panic. James pulled Ioka against the wall, shielding her with his body. The scouts watched from above, their eyes wide, their hands steady on their bows. For them, the land had always been alive, full of spirits and trials. Now the soldiers were learning the lesson too late. In this gorge, they were not conquerors. They were prey. The lion vanished into the rocks, dragging its kill, leaving behind only a crimson smear and the sound of horses snorting in terror. The silence that followed was worse than the scream, thick and suffocating. Every man waited, rifles trembling, for the next strike. James's pulse thundered. He had hoped the wilderness might slow the soldiers, but now it had bloodied them. Fear was in their ranks, gnawing fast. He knew what came next: panic, rash choices, men firing at shadows. And in the chaos, more would fall. He glanced at Ioka. Her face was pale but steady, her eyes fixed on him. "This is only the beginning," she whispered. He nodded grimly. She was right. The golden death had not yet shown itself. This was a warning, a taste of the power that ruled these mountains. And somewhere above, in the labyrinth of stone and shadow, the true hunt had already begun. The gorge had become a tomb of silence. No man moved without flinching, no horse shifted without sending hearts racing. James studied the walls, the ledges, the dark crevices above. Somewhere in that maze of stone and shadow, the great lion watched them, waiting. The soldiers huddled together now, their bravado shattered. Their commander barked orders, but fear had eaten the steel from his voice. James could see it in their eyes. Men who had believed themselves masters of the frontier, now stripped bare by a single predator. Running Fox crouched beside James, whispering harshly in Apache. Ioka translated, her voice low. "He says we cannot keep moving. The lion will strike again and again until none of us are left." James's gaze lingered on the ridge where the soldier had fallen. He remembered the weight of another lion years before, the heat of its breath, the wild fury in its eyes. That beast had been desperate. This one was different. This one was lord of its domain, striking with purpose. He turned to Ioka. "If we keep running, it will pick us off one by one. If the soldiers don't kill us, the lion will. There's only one way to end this." Her brow furrowed. "What way?"
"I draw it out," James said simply. "It wants prey. It wants me. While it's fixed on me, the rest of you can move. Get out, find safe ground." Ioka shook her head sharply. "No, that is death." James met her gaze, steady as stone. "I've carried death on my shoulders before, but maybe this time I can carry it for someone else." The words surprised even him. All his years of solitude, he had lived only for himself, guarding what little he had left. Now, with this girl's dark eyes fixed on his, with young warriors depending on him, the weight of his life felt less precious than the chance to give theirs back. A verse rose unbidden, clear as if spoken in the wind. "So do not fear, for I am with you. Do not be dismayed, for I am your God. I will strengthen you and help you. I will uphold you with my righteous right hand." Isaiah 41:10. James closed his eyes, letting the words settle deep. He felt the fear, yes, but also something stronger, a quiet resolve, a hand steadying his heart. When he opened them again, he pulled the Apache knife from his belt, its bone handle warm in his grip. He held it up so the firelight caught the etched symbols. "Tell them," he said to Ioka, "when the lion comes, I'll stand in the open. You get the others through the gorge. No matter what happens, you don't look back." Ioka's voice broke. "James!" But before she could finish, a sound split the night. A low growl, deep as thunder, rolled through the canyon. The horses shrieked, stamping in terror. The golden death was coming. The growl deepened into a roar that shook the very stone, a sound so primal it seemed to tear through marrow. From the shadows above, the beast appeared, massive, golden hide rippling over muscle, eyes glowing like molten fire. The golden death leapt from the ridge, claws extended, fangs bared, a thunderbolt of flesh and fury. James stood his ground. His rifle was useless at this range.
Instead, he gripped the Apache knife with both hands, the symbols carved into its blade catching the flicker of torchlight. In that instant, he thought of every man he had buried, every battle he had fled, every night he had spent alone. This was his reckoning. The lion struck. Its weight crashed into him like a falling boulder, driving him to the ground. Claws raked his shoulder, searing fire through his flesh. He gasped, teeth gritted, forcing the knife upward, the blade flashing inches from the beast's throat. The canyon erupted in chaos. Horses screamed. Soldiers fired wildly into the dark, their bullets sparking against stone. The Apache scouts shouted, arrows loosed but finding no mark. To them, it was a blur of man and monster locked in a deadly embrace. James's vision narrowed. The lion's breath was hot against his face, reeking of blood. Its roar thundered in his ears as jaws snapped inches from his throat. His arms trembled, muscles burning as the beast pressed harder, forcing the knife closer to his own chest than the lion's. He prayed, not in words, but in a cry from the marrow of his soul. "Lord, if my life ends here, let it mean something. Let it not be wasted."
The lion lunged again, and James twisted with all his strength, rolling beneath it. Dust and stones scraped his back raw. He drove the knife upward, the bone handle slick with blood. His or the beast's, he couldn't tell. The blade found flesh. The golden death roared in fury, thrashing, claws tearing furrows through his side. Pain exploded, white-hot, but James held on. He wrenched the blade deeper, pushing past the scream of his own body. Then, sudden stillness. The lion shuddered once, its golden eyes blazing, then dimming. It collapsed across him, its massive weight crushing the breath from his chest. For a heartbeat, he thought he had failed, that the beast had only paused before the final strike. But then its body sagged heavy, lifeless, blood soaking the dust. James shoved it aside, every muscle trembling, lungs dragging in ragged gulps of air.
His shirt was torn, his flesh burning with claw marks, but he was alive. Against all odds, he was alive. Silence swept the gorge. The soldiers lowered their rifles, their faces pale, eyes wide with a terror no battlefield had ever given them. The Apache scouts stared too, not with fear, but with awe.
And in the flickering torchlight, Ioka stepped forward, her gaze shining not with relief alone, but with something deeper, faith fulfilled. James Callahan had slain the Golden Death. For a long moment, no one moved. Dust swirled in the canyon, mingling with the smell of blood and powder. The Golden Death lay motionless at James's feet, its golden hide dull now, its reign ended. James stood over it, chest heaving, knife dripping red in his hand. The silence broke with the snort of a terrified horse. A soldier dropped his rifle, his eyes fixed on the carcass. "God help us," he whispered, his voice trembling. The commander tried to rally his men, but the words caught in his throat. They had seen comrades fall to bullets before, but never to claws, never to the wild power of the land itself. To fight men was one thing, to challenge what they now saw as judgment from the wilderness, perhaps even the hand of God, was another. One by one, they backed away. Horses turned, hooves clattering on stone. The commander cursed, tried to hold the line, but fear was stronger. Within moments, the soldiers retreated down the gorge, their shouts fading into the distance, leaving only the dead beast and the living who had outlasted it. James sank to one knee, every breath jagged, blood seeping from torn flesh. His strength waned, but his spirit held steady. Ioka was suddenly at his side, pressing cloth to his wounds, her dark eyes wet with tears. "You should not have lived," she whispered. James managed a faint smile. "Story of my life." Running Fox approached, the young scout who had doubted him most. He bowed low, touching the earth, then his forehead, a gesture of reverence. The others followed, forming a circle around James and the fallen lion. Their voices rose in a chant, low, rhythmic, echoing through the canyon. It was not for the beast. It was for the man who had stood alone and prevailed. Ioka translated softly through the chant. "They call you Ta-Dine-E, brother of the people. You are no longer alone." James closed his eyes, the words washing over him like balm. For years he had carried only the weight of solitude, a wanderer with no home but the walls he had built around himself. Now, in the eyes of these young warriors, in the touch of Ioka's hands on his wounds, he felt something break open. Not just survival, belonging. He thought of the verse that had carried him into the lion's jaws. "Do not fear, for I am with you." Looking up at the endless sky above the canyon, James breathed those words again, not as a prayer of desperation, but as a hymn of gratitude. When they left the gorge, they did not carry fear. They carried meat for the village, the lion's pelt as a symbol of victory, and the story of the white rancher who had stood against death itself. James Callahan had entered the mountains as a loner. He emerged not as a stranger, not as prey, but as a man bound in honor, blood, and faith to a people who now called him brother. If you like this video, please comment number 9. If you don't like it, please comment number 0. The journey back through the mountains was slower, heavier. The hunters carried what meat they could salvage, their shoulders bowed under the weight, but their hearts lighter than they had been in months. The Golden Death was no more, and its fall had broken not only fear, but hunger's grip on the tribe. James rode in silence, his body aching with every step of the mare beneath him. Bandages wrapped his chest and shoulder, Ioka's careful hands having bound them tight. Blood still seeped through, but he bore the pain without complaint. Pain meant he was alive. Pain meant he had stood and endured. When they reached the valley, smoke rose from dozens of fires. The Apache village stirred with sudden cries of joy.
Children ran first, their laughter echoing across the plain. Women followed, their eyes wide with relief as they saw the hunters return, not empty-handed, but laden with meat. Then the chants began, low at first, then swelling as the tribe gathered, circling the hunters. James dismounted stiffly, clutching his side. But before he could retreat into shadow, Running Fox stepped forward, raising his hand. His young voice rang out, carrying authority far beyond his years. "He fought the Golden Death," Running Fox declared in Apache. Ayoka translated softly at James's side, her voice trembling with emotion. "He bled where others fled. He faced what no man dares and lived." An elder approached, leaning on a carved staff. His face was lined with age, his eyes dark wells of wisdom. He studied James in silence, then placed the staff in his hands. The wood was polished smooth, etched with symbols that told stories James could not yet read. "You are not stranger," the elder said slowly in broken English. "You are brother." The circle erupted in voices, cheers, chants, songs rising into the air like smoke to heaven. James stood frozen, the staff trembling in his grip. For years he had lived alone, convinced that loneliness was the price he must pay for surviving war. Yet here, among a people not his own, he was given a place, a name, a bond stronger than blood. Ayoka touched his arm gently. "They honor you," she whispered. "They see you as one who stands between." James's throat tightened. He turned toward her, searching her eyes. In their depths, he saw not only gratitude, but trust, affection, and something that had grown in the quiet spaces between flight and fear. He had saved her life, yes, but she had saved something in him too, the part that still believed life could mean more than surviving. As night fell, the village feasted. Fires crackled, meat roasted, drums beat in steady rhythm. James sat among them, awkward at first, then slowly letting the warmth of their fellowship seep into him. Children crept close, tracing the scars on his hands as if they were medals. Young warriors asked him of battles past, listening wide-eyed to the man who had faced both soldiers and lions. When the drums quieted, Ayoka sang. Her voice rose like smoke, soft and strong, weaving words James could not understand, but felt deep in his bones. She sang of the canyon, of the lion, of the man who had stood between death and her people. James bowed his head, humbled. He thought of the verse that had steadied him before he faced the beast. "Do not fear, for I am with you." It had carried him through blood and shadow. Now, surrounded by a people who once would have called him enemy, he understood the fullness of that promise. He had not walked alone. When the song ended, Ayoka sat beside him, her hand brushing his. No words passed between them, but none were needed. In that touch was a vow, not yet love spoken, but love waiting, patient and sure, like embers that glow long after the fire burns low. For the first time in years, James Callahan felt not only alive, but at home. The firelight burned low, casting long shadows across the village. Children had fallen asleep in their mothers' arms, the drums now silent, the night calm but for the crackle of embers and the murmur of voices in distant lodges. James sat apart on a log, the carved staff across his knees, his eyes lifted toward the endless stars. He thought back to the morning the soldiers had surrounded his ranch, rifles glinting in the dawn. He had believed then that his life was over, or worse, that he would be forced to live with the shame of surrender. Instead, that day had carried him here, to this fire, to these people, to this new chapter he could never have imagined. Ayoka approached quietly, her blanket draped over her shoulders. She lowered herself onto the log beside him, her presence gentle but steady. For a while they said nothing, only listened to the crackle of fire and the sigh of the night wind through the grass. "You are far from the man I first saw," she said at last. Her voice was soft, like a prayer. "That day, you were alone. Now you are not."
James turned the staff in his hands, running his fingers over the carved symbols. "I thought loneliness was all I deserved. After the war, after the graves," he stopped, his throat tightening. "But I see now the Lord had other plans." She studied him, the firelight catching in her dark eyes. "In my people's tongue, we say the Creator writes our path across the earth like rivers. Sometimes the rivers twist, sometimes they vanish into stone, but always they flow to where they must." He nodded slowly, the words sinking deep. "And maybe 2 rivers were meant to meet here." Silence stretched between them again, but this silence was not empty. It was full of trust, of the bond born in fear and forged in courage. James felt her hand brush his, light as the touch of wind. He did not pull away. His gaze lifted once more to the stars, and he whispered a verse that had carried him through more than one dark night. "The Lord is my shepherd, I lack nothing. He makes me lie down in green pastures. He leads me beside quiet waters. He refreshes my soul." Psalm 23, 1-3. The words hung in the night air, gentle as the smoke rising into the heavens. Ayoka did not understand them all, but she felt their weight, their peace. When the dawn came, the village stirred with new life. Hunters prepared for journeys, women gathered to cook, children laughed as they chased one another through the grass. James rose, stiff from wounds but alive, the staff in his hand marking him not as stranger but as brother. Some of the scouts saluted him with proud nods, others offered food or a pat on the shoulder. Respect flowed easily now, not demanded but freely given. He returned to his horse, saddlebags filled with supplies. Ayoka joined him, her own belongings packed neatly. She looked at him with quiet certainty. "Where you go, I go," she said simply. James met her gaze, and though words failed him, the truth shone in his eyes. He was no longer the man who sought only solitude. He was no longer the rancher who clung to silence as his only companion. He was a man with a people, with a calling, with a reason to rise each day. The lion's roar had once threatened to end him. Instead, it had given him back his life. As he and Ayoka rode out with the scouts, the village behind them glowing in the morning sun, James felt a peace deeper than he had ever known. He had entered the wilderness alone. He left it as brother, as protector, as man reborn in courage and faith. And somewhere in the vast sky above, he knew God's hand was steady on the rivers still to come. As we leave James Callahan and Ayoka beneath the wide sky of the frontier, perhaps you too feel the weight of their journey echoing in your own heart. The West was never just about guns and dust. It was about courage, sacrifice, and the quiet faith that carried ordinary souls through extraordinary trials. Many of you watching have walked your own rugged trails, faced your own lions, loss, loneliness, fear. And like James, you found strength not in fear, but in love, in hope, and in God's guiding hand. If stories like this stir something deep within you, then stay with us. Subscribe, share, and keep walking these paths together as we bring you more true Wild West stories, tales that honor the past, speak to the soul, and remind us that no one is ever truly alone.